Me bring it out. Where do I start? I grew up, my parents weren't, I would say, religious, especially not my dad. My mom grew up in the Philippines, and everybody there is Catholic. So I remember going to Mass a couple of times when I was little. My dad definitely never went, but I remember going a couple of times with my mom, and I have this distinct memory that we were in a service, and it was the time that like everybody started to get up to go get communion. But at this time, pre-COVID, pre-everything, right? Everybody was drinking from the same cup. And I, as a kid, was like, germs, this is gross. Like, Mom, you're gonna get sick, don't do it, you know? I didn't know what was going on. I was totally unaware, but that's my memory of church as a kid, right? But then as I got a little older, my parents were invited to go to this Baptist church in town, and it was one of my mom's friends, so she went as a friend, and we all went. But then we ended up really enjoying the community there and the people there, and so we ended up going more regularly. And at this point, I was probably in the third grade, and then I was in Sunday school, did the whole thing, you know, and eventually I got into youth group, and I was saved in the 6th grade, got baptized, and from there I became a youth leader in my youth group. And yeah, what else should I share?
There's a lot of really churchy terminology there, so I'm going to break some of this down because I'm from the South as well. And just so you guys, like, when we say Baptist, that word can mean a lot of things. And once you're out of the South, the word Baptist is a very generic word. But have you guys heard of Liberty University? Right, it's the biggest Christian college in the U.S. That is the Southern Baptist College. And when we say Baptist, we're actually referring to the denomination called the Southern Baptist, which, a little history, there's like 5 different Baptist denominations in the U.S., and if you go to a Baptist church in California, it is not a Southern Baptist church. Those don't really exist out here. They're mostly in the Southeast, the South, and somewhat in the Midwest. But the Southern Baptists were a branch off of the traditional Baptist church post-Civil War. The Southern Baptists believed that it still affirmed slavery. And so they left the Baptist and became the Southern Baptist. And that's the biggest denomination in the U.S., if you didn't know that. The Southern Baptist Church is the largest denomination. And so I grew up I didn't grow up in a church either, but my first church experience was in Southern Baptist as well. And when you were talking about youth group, that's a big part of Southern Baptist culture. Like, kids, like, and Catholic kids, like, go through confirmation, right? Or, like, you know, you grow up and then, like, you go to a class and it confirms your infant baptism. The Southern Baptist is like, they have youth group. So that means when you're in 6th grade, 6th grade through 12th grade, you are now in, like, an extracurricular activity program that does all sorts of things, and your life revolves around youth group.
Yeah, it was like Sunday mornings you had Sunday school, and then also you had a midweek thing on Wednesdays, and you had all these volunteer opportunities every week.
And every quarter, Southern Baptist churches typically do something big for the youth group.
Yeah.
Like whether it's like a lock-in.
Yes.
Or
oh my gosh, yes.
Lock-in, or like a ski trip, or go to the water park. Like, 6th through 12th grade in the life of a Southern Baptist teenager is very busy. Yes. It's like you have school and you got church. And honestly, they do a lot of good with that because it gets a lot of kids like connected to church and also making friends in their community. And especially like you're from Ruckersville. But if we say it like the locals is, they take like a syllable out. It's not Ruckersville, it's like Ruxville.
It's not like that.
Very Southern. But Ruckersville would be one high school, but your youth group would probably pull from like Charlottesville as well. So like you start to meet kids that are believers that you don't know, which I think is an important part of a faith journey for somebody like a kid in the South, right? So you mentioned the phrase youth leader. Okay,
yes.
I understand what you mean because I know the Southern Baptist. So what does it mean in the Southern Baptist Church to be a youth leader?
So I essentially led Bible studies for teenagers my age,
And you were how old?
all through 6th through 12th grade.
So you're
I think
in
I
sixth
became a
grade.
leader in the 8th grade maybe. And so ever since then I was leading small groups and or like doing events. I remember in my senior year or maybe junior, I had visited another church in town that was doing like their guest experience really well. And I actually encouraged my youth group to have more of a guest experience. And so I got all of our teens together and I got us out in front of the church welcoming people in the parking lot. And that was one of my first things that I like took ownership in and like was outside of the norm. And so, yeah.
And then, like, as you were ending your youth group career,
Yes.
career,
Career.
you decided that you wanted to vocationally, like, work in the church, within the church. So tell me about what it was like, because at this point, like in your story, and how could you, like, nobody really knows who they are at like 17. You know, like we're so formative, even through our 20s, and we never stop growing. You know what I mean? Like we're always kind of changing, and God is always doing something in here and kind of something up here. And so we're always on a journey, but I would say like 16 to like 25 are probably the most ignorant years. It's no offense if you're in this room, but you don't know who you are, 16 to 25, but you think you do, and so you're dangerous, right?
That's
you
right.
think
You
you know
think
who
you
you
do.
are, but you have no clue who you are. And so like and what's weird about our culture as Americans is that we make a lot of big decisions between 16 and 25. A lot of people get married, which is why the divorce rate is now over 50%. We go into careers and go to college and pick a career at 18, and then we leave that career by the time we're 30. So a lot of people graduate with one thing and do another with their life. Anyway, but you're in this window, this 16 to 25 window, and you decide, I'm going to work for the church. So what was that like, and what did you do with that with that decision?
Well, at first, I didn't think I wanted to work in the church. I ended up going to UVA, a local college, and I had fully planned on becoming a doctor.
You say UVA, a local college, like UVA is not some nationally known, prestigious.
Well,
UVA is like the
people-
most prestigious college in Virginia. Okay?
Most people don't
It's
know what
local.
UVA is out
Yeah,
here.
University of Virginia. Who's?
Well-
Like don't downplay your college, Jen. She went to a medical school, like a big, fancy school.
Well, anyways, I went there, and I had totally planned on becoming a doctor, and in my first year, I struggled so hard because when I was in high school, school was so easy for me, and I also just came from a really small rural school, in the middle of
It
nowhere.
was like that one room with like 12 desks.
Not quite,
With the
but,
teacher that taught all the
know.
grades.
I mean,
that was your
I
high
knew,
school, right?
I knew every single person I went to school with. It
Built-
was
it's
that
a
small.
Wooden box.
I think my graduating class was 150 people. And so it's pretty small considering the local areas. But anyways, so I had a hard time in college, but then I also just had this like, whatever the opposite feeling of peace is, that's what I had about what I was doing. Like, I just didn't feel right. I felt like, okay, maybe this isn't right. Maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And sure enough, like, I'm in that window and I am trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. I thought it was this. I thought it was going to be that since the 6th grade, but then it wasn't. And so I actually went through this period of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? Because I feel like at 18, I should know what I'm supposed to do. I should be in school for it and I need to be studying for it. I'm going to get behind. It's this, that fear of the rat race. Like, I was just terrified. I need to know what I should be doing. And also compound that, I am a planner and I like to have a plan. I have goals and I want to do those things. And so I was just totally lost for a season. And then I ended up going back to some of the people I looked up to, mentors and different things, a lot of those people from my old church. And every single one of them in separate conversations all said, well, have you ever considered going into ministry? you are such a great leader in youth group and all these things, you know, and you have the heart for it. And so I was like, you know what, maybe, I'll see. I didn't really think it was for me, but I was like, okay, I'll try it. So I had a friend at this point in college who was interning at a church, and she was like, you know what, Jen, you should just come intern here, get your feet wet, see what it's about, and see if it's for you. And so that's what I did.
I want to hear a little bit about that decision in the sense that, and I also want you to translate going into ministry, because that's a very like churchy phrase. Like, break down what that phrase means, going into ministry. But also, I want you to share what it was like coming out of the Southern Baptist Church and also being in the South. Women typically don't have a place in leadership. Like, just gonna be honest, like that's not very that's a very unusual thing, and especially like the Southern Baptist Church, unless you're a missionary. Like, women can be missionaries in the Southern Baptist Church. They cannot be pastors. They cannot be ordained. They can't lead higher than a male can lead. So you're a woman, and so share a little bit about what it meant as a woman to go into ministry, and also break down what going into ministry meant to you.
So for me, going into ministry meant my job was going to become doing church things. So like, we are all called into a form of ministry, right? You do ministry in your everyday life, but what I call going into ministry was going to be the thing that I devoted my life to, in order to reaching our city and meeting people where they are, right? And leading people. And so for me, that looked like stepping into a guest experience role at the time as an intern. And I never wanted to be, you know, pastor, ordained, or any of that. Like, I'm not the kind of person that wants to be out in front of people, hence the hives. And so, anyways, I didn't really want that, and I was okay with that, you know? And so I started out by just serving in our guest services ministry, which is essentially helping people feel welcome at the church. Noticing if someone is new and how to notice new people, and making sure they have a great experience, that they don't feel lost, especially at a larger church, which at this time, this one was larger and grew even past that. So,
yeah. So hit on. You broke down like what it meant to go into ministry, right? So I always used to tell our staff, because if you know a little bit about our history, like we've been working together for almost 10 years now, 8 of those years at a church in the South. And I was the executive pastor there when I left, which just meant I oversaw the entire 14-member staff. And I always tried to help the staff understand that, like, when you're vocationally in ministry, like when you have a job, any job, right? You do a good job and you're compensated for that job. You add value and you're compensated for that value. Whenever you work in a church, you're basically freed from having a job. Like, that's like the people that are tithing or giving are saying your time will be better spent doing the work of this than you having to go out and devote your time to something else. And so I kind of try to instill that idea in our team, is that, like, because, you know, people in a church are paid out of other people's generosity and giving. But the goal is not necessarily like, hey, do the job like this, bring in 50,000 more in tithe dollars this year. You know what I mean? That's not how churches work. So instead, like, this group of people, and at our church in the South, you know, several thousands or whatever, they're saying your time is better spent working on the work of the church, the work of the Lord. And so we're freeing you from having to go devote your time to something else. And there's a weight that comes with that, because you're starting now to think like, man, somebody's buying my time. These people of this church are buying my time so I can focus on the work of the Lord. Like, there's a spiritual responsibility that comes with that, not just let me clock in and clock out. You know what I mean? So that's heavy anyway on most people. But then you, being a woman, like, share a little bit about, like, you came into this knowing that you can only do so much as a woman. Mm-hmm. So how did that play into your career mindset of going into ministry?
I mean, I knew there was only so much that I could do and would do. But I also, just because of my personality, right, I don't want to be on the stage. But it also meant that even if I wanted to, I didn't have the opportunity to. And in some cases, even, like, you are doing a lot of the same work, but you aren't allowed the title. But I mean, I think maybe I'm weird, but I just never wanted.
Yeah, and I think
that.
it's important to, like, for everyone to know this part of the story, because a lot of times we get kind of stuck in what we can and can't do. You know, we enter into a position or into a calling or into a situation thinking, okay, what can I do and what can I do? But here's the thing, like, God can do anything through you. There's, you know what I mean? And I think that's an important distinction, because as we're going to find out in your story just in a minute, hopefully, if you answer my questions the way I think you will, God did a lot of things in you that you never saw yourself doing or being able to do. So talk about your personal journey through figuring out who you are. Because I'm gonna out you for a moment. You've exited that weird season of 16 to 26, where you think you know who you are, but you don't. And now you're approaching the season where I think you might have your first midlife crisis or quarter life crisis, which is 30. Did anybody have that? You hit 30 and all of a sudden you were like, what's happening to my life? I had that. Now I'm hitting 40 and it feels actually, in many ways, it feels better. I have less hair. That doesn't feel as good. But Jen, you're hitting 30 in like 3 weeks. So
3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And Jen gets Christmas, New Year's, and birthday all back to back. But the journey to self-discovery and figuring out why God made you the way you are, like, share a little bit about how you figured that out. Because you did a lot of different things to figure out who you are. Mm-hmm. And you never saw yourself doing many of the things you did. So share a little bit about how God used those little moments to help you figure out who you are.
Okay. Again, I haven't prepared, so I'm going to do my best. So I guess for me, it started, I would say, right in that, like, college age time where I was really unsure. And at that point, I'm a blank slate, right? I am like, okay, God, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. Here I am, send me, right? And so I'm just open. But I'm also kind of terrified, right? Because I'm also not the kind of person that likes to be in front of people, all that. And so I was like, here I am, send me, just don't put me at the front of the room, right? So I am definitely a trial by fire person, I would say. Like, sometimes I do well if I'm just, like, thrown in and I got to figure it out. Don't do that all the time, please. But this is how I learned, especially when I was younger. I just jumped into something and I went for it and I would just make myself figure it out. And I have the discipline to do that, right? And I think it's also in my personality type that I don't want to look bad, or I don't want to do something wrong or do it badly. And so when I first started out, I was interning, and I actually had to support raise for that internship. So essentially, the church didn't pay for me at this point. I had to raise funds like a missionary to work at the church and fully support myself. I actually ended up staying with a family in town in their basement for that year. And that season was a lot of character building and I think, like, foundation laying for me, because especially with, like, finances and just understanding money and the church and what I'm called to, you know? And I think that set me up, kind of like how you were saying, like, you like to instill in staff what their job looks like and what this means for them, right? So for me, having to, you know, go around to people that I knew, I had to get my heart right and say, you know, I feel called to this job. I feel called to serve our community. Would you be a part of that with me? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? You're inviting other people to be on this journey with you. And so that was a piece that got me started, I think, in part of my journey. I also was, just after that intern year, or at the end of it, I guess, I went into another internship year. And I was leading our second campus, which he talked about, in the county that I grew up.
The one that was super redneck and we had to close,
Yes.
as I shared in the beginning.
Well, so I was helping lead that from the whole guest services experience side, right? And so that was a very trying time for me personally as a leader. So I had led in youth group and led different things, right? And I, up until this point, had supported the guest services staff member, but as an intern. And so I watched her for almost a year before I went to this other campus. And so I had tried to bring over what we were doing at our main campus to this other campus, and it was extremely hard, especially as a young woman in ministry trying to lead much older men, honestly, in the church and in that.
Men also who are not used to having women
Yes.
tell them what, or give them tasks or anything.
So it was really hard to do.
And I'll pull back because I've been away from this church now for a couple of years. Like I was part of the decision making to close the campus. That's never a fun decision. It's a hard decision, because you're going to shut a church down and take away people's church. But we had to make the decision not only to cut that church off, and we made them autonomous, made them their own campus after investing $200,000 to launch them. And we had to fire every staff from our staff and make them their own staff. But Jen was the only one we pulled back, right? Mm-hmm. So, that campus fell apart under us because of things like Jen just described, which, and I know, that meme with the little dog, and he's looking really traumatic, and he sees the helicopters in the background. You know what I'm talking about? There's a meme. It's a war meme, and it's PTSD. For many years, that meme described what I thought about this experience. But you being there and having to go through such can I just use the word what it is? It was a major failure on everyone's part. It was so what did you, how did that impact you discovering you?
Oh, I totally thought I wasn't cut out for ministry. I was I felt like I was thrown to dogs, and I was okay, this isn't for me. I totally lost all confidence in myself. I didn't think I was cut out for it. I was okay, clearly this isn't working. This isn't for me. Maybe me going into ministry was a mistake. And I almost just left.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes whenever we try to reach people for the Lord, we hit failure. You know what I mean? You ever just prayed for someone, shared with somebody, thought through man, how do I get them to church? How do I get them to the Lord? And it just never works out. You know what I'm talking about? Have you guys been there? You have someone in your heart, someone in your mind, you just want to see you see the solution for them. You see the answer actually is right in front of you. It's a relationship with Jesus Christ and getting involved in a church community. You can lay that down, just get him, and you see it, but they don't ever take it. And that's, who wants to quit at that point? I mean, we're all just done, and we don't want to do it anymore. I think it takes some character to persevere through it. And so you had mentioned earlier, you had a lot of character development over these years, and there are so many little stories we can pull out, and for the sake of time, we're going to just kind of move on. But I think that's such an important thing to know, is that every failure you experience is an opportunity for God to grow you in the midst of it. You may not have, that situation, that person, that may not have worked the way you saw it working, and it feels bad, It feels like you let somebody down, or maybe God is not listening to your prayers or whatever. But reality is, that failure was for you. Because what the enemy meant for evil, what does God do? He turns it for good. And so, Jen, over the next several years, as you're figuring out, you really had, and I know your story well because I got to watch it. Failures, victories, working for a direct report that took all the credit for every good thing you did and blamed you for every bad thing they did. that was a fun season. But then you figured out you, right? What did God do when you started to realize your purpose and design? What did God do within you as you realized your purpose and your design?
I think over time, I had a lot of failures. I had a lot of victories too. And I think it honestly just helped me. And keep in mind, oh my gosh, I still have so much I'm working on, right? We all do. And I am still firming up a lot of this. But I think a lot of those experiences just firmed up a piece in me, and is still firming up a piece in me that ultimately what I do doesn't necessarily define me, right? It's the character. It's God's character inside me, right? Because we were all created in his image. And so I, over the years, have had to learn how to identify myself as one with Christ, not necessarily my job or how I perform or the things that I do, right? My identity is more about who God is and how I am more like him every day.
The scriptures say that we are all called ministers, right? Paul says we're all, in the phrase is ministers of reconciliation. Love that verse, because we are to be out on behalf of others trying to reconcile them with God, meaning that we bridge the gap between where they are and where God is. So if you're in Christ, you are titled, this is your position, a minister of reconciliation. You are a bridge builder between the God that you know and the person that does not know him, or the world that does not know him. You are a bridge builder. You can do that vocationally, or you can do that in any vocation you have. You can do that as a parent, even if you have. You're just bridging gaps all day long. We're just bridging the gap between God and other people. I think one of the biggest disservices our culture has done with vocational church is that we've begun, like regular, like everyday believers start to think, well, that's the pastor's job. That's the minister's job. That's the priest's job, if you're in that branch, whatever. But it's your job. You know what I mean? It's your job. Like I'll use you as an example. Jen's last position, because she had like 4 or 5 jobs in her time at the point, or the second to last position was over the whole volunteer team. And it was your job to make sure our volunteers felt appreciated, cared for. You were HR for 600 volunteers. And you might think like, well, but really like that experience, all that was doing was enabling our teams, the teams at the time, to go out and do the job. Do you see what I'm saying? Your job is to be a minister of reconciliation. That is your job. If I say, what is your job? You're supposed to say, I'm a minister of reconciliation. I don't like that word. But you get what I'm saying? Like, that is your job. And so what are you doing to bridge gaps, to be out there? And there's so many ways that we can do that. So Jen, how would you encourage somebody to step into that job? Because you've had a lot of different roles. You've done a lot of different bridging. You've done a lot of different things. Like somebody take everyone in this room or someone that's watching online who's saying like, how do I do that? How do I find my job? How do I be that? How would you encourage them?
I would say it's, I think your actions speak a lot louder than your words do. I think that you just living out God's character, like I said, says a lot, right? And you know how you like meet people and you can just tell there's like something about them. It's the same way that people come into our space and they just can tell that something's different or they have a good energy or whatever it is. I think even that in and of itself is like opening a door for conversation. And I think just leading with love first goes a long way. So no matter where you are, you can do that, right? Whether that's in your family or at work or your neighbors or in the grocery store, you can be love to someone. You can be kind and have joy and all these things. And I think that in and of itself can bridge a gap for someone.
Yeah, and you talk about that character. Like if you're looking for a character test, just compare your character against the fruits of the Spirit. It's an easy list. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You can say, am I living out these things? Or evaluate your end of the day. Today, did I live out or did I not live out self-control? Did I not live out joy? And then fix it the next day. That's kind of like where I've landed in my day-to-day. I just try to make sure that my character and who I am is living out God's character and who he is. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. My kids have that list memorized because every time they break a rule and they violate one of those, you've heard it. I say, all right, tell me the fruits of the Spirit. And Elijah's like, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. But I want that instilled, written on their heart. You know what I mean? I want them to always have those characteristics. That's God. That's God's character. That's the fruit in which the Holy Spirit in you bears. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
And then which one did you not have?
I always thought, which one did you violate today? And it's always self-control with my kids. Always. Self-control. Spinning around, knocks over a Christmas tree in World Market. Self-control. But that's like the character test, I think, is look at that list of the fruits of the Spirit and weigh yourself against them every day. Jen, you didn't break out in hives. I'm super proud of you. That's a big deal, y'all. She is growing so much. And I'm going to out you with something else. You're getting ordained right now, aren't you? Aren't you trying to get ordained? Yeah, her plan is to get ordained. And so from where she was to where she is, it's pretty amazing. So thank you for sharing. And I hope you're encouraged today. I think if I was to say what is the biggest lesson we take from this, it's that recognize your journey and be okay with it. And figure out the end. You know what I mean? Figure out what you're supposed to do about it, what you're supposed to do with it. Because God's got something for you. God's got a plan for you, a purpose for you. None of us live without purpose. If we live without purpose, we'd just be like an animal. But no, but we're not. We're made in God's image. There's a purpose and something important about us. Hey, as we close out today, let's all stand together. Next week is going to be our last Sunday of the year. I want you to be here, and can I challenge you? Next week, let's pack this place out. Let's call everyone. Let's get them all home for Christmas. Pastor Jesse's sharing next week about some vision we have going into 2023. It's going to be real exciting. We're going to sing some more Christmas carols next week, and we're just going to spend this time closing out this year, praising God for all He's done. This has been a really wonky year, I think, for many people, and but God's good through it all, right? But we're also looking at next year and what God is going to do. God is on the move. He's on the move here at the gathering. He's on the move in many places, in many ways. And so it's exciting. So let me pray over us as we close today.
Wait, are you going to Christmas party?
Yes, we'll go to that. Let me pray and close out, and then you can do announcements. All right. God, we thank you so much for all of your blessings, for everything that you have just bestowed upon us, God. We thank you for sending your son here as an example of a life that we should live, but also as an ultimate sacrifice for our sin. God, thank you for raising your son from the grave, God, that we may have eternal life. God, we give you all the glory as we sang earlier, and we open up to receive you, Father, and we give you the praise that you are due, all the honor and glory to your name today, God. We love you. We thank you. We ask you to help us understand our purpose. God, and help us to come alive to it. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Hey, real quick, before Jen gets to announcements, let's thank Jen today for all that she shared and for not breaking out in hives. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen. She's going to share a few important things about the coming up week or so. And then, she'll close us out.
Okay. So one quick thing.